Hello, Brad, and thank you so much for joining me on our You Flourish podcast. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today and for our listeners to hear your story. I know you and I know each other a little bit, but as I've gotten to know you, I've just been amazed by your experiences. And I really think that you have something special to share with our audience today when it comes to your story. And so I want to just dive in and go right off the bat, just have you tell us maybe more about who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners today. Um, so, Brad Lindblad, I was born in West Fargo, raised there, still live there. And important things first, family. My wife, been married to for 7 years. I have three young kids under 5 years old. Um, as I work at Egg Country, I think you mentioned that, and I'm a data scientist there. And when I'm not spending time with my family and kids, which takes up most of my time, I like to get out hunting and work out and stuff like that. So that's kind of the elevator speech on myself.
Love it, Brad. Well, and now you've gone through some pretty challenging times throughout your life. I wanted to know if you would be willing to maybe share more about kind of your journey with your faith, and kind of some of those difficulties that you've encountered along the way.
Yeah. This is the kind of the first time I've ever um, spoken the story out loud, the whole story, I guess, because it's kind of a long story that spans a few years. But starting at the beginning, grew up in the church, Lutheran church. Got confirmed, went to church, all that kind of stuff. You're kind of a casual Christian, right? Not extremely dedicated, but also not someone that just went on Christmas and Easter. I wasn't a C&E Christian. I was somewhere in the middle. And years later, when I was in my 30s now, I read the Screw Tape Letters again. Great book by C.S. Lewis, and I'm going to paraphrase, but one of the things that these demons, these tempters, that one of the ways they try to entice people to go away from God was by giving them a good time, giving them an easy life. Don't have challenges in front of them. And the first part of my life was very unchallenging. I was had a great family, still have a great family. Didn't have major challenges, so didn't really need to lean on God as much as I did starting in my 20s. So that's kind of the first part of my life. And then when I was 22, I went in to have what I thought was a routine surgery on. I had a lump on my hand, which the doctors always told me was just like a fibroma, I think they called it, which was wrong. But it was essentially a lump in my hand. It looked, pretty unserious. So it started to interfere with my bench press. So I went and got it out eventually when I was 22, like I said, and went in to get the stitches out from the surgery. And the doctor, who did not have a good bedside manner, or maybe he was just really nervous, I'm not sure. Either way, it wasn't good at the time. But he ran into the room almost, and he said, I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And he said, "Good, but you're not. You have cancer." And of course, that was not what I was expecting at the time. And I was shocked. And I said, "Well, is it what cancer in my hand? I've never heard of that." And he's like, "Yeah, it's something called sarcoma, and it's extremely rare, very, very rare. It's very dangerous. And I wouldn't even go to Sanford in Fargo for it. I'd go to somewhere like, the Cleveland Clinic or Mayo." That's what he said. This is all within a couple minutes of him walking in the room. So it was quite the shock. That's being diagnosed with cancer at such a young age, and leading up to it, my doctors didn't give me any indication that it could be something cancerous. They just thought it was, some scar tissue from something. So that happened, and I went and told my friends and family about it, and my family reacted as you would expect them. A lot of my friends, reacted with disbelief, and they also really didn't know how to handle it, because when you're that young, you don't have friends that are getting diagnosed with cancer. When you're in your 50s and 60s, you've ran into that problem before, so you know how to handle it better. But my friends that were just out of college had no clue how to handle it. So that was also kind of interesting at the time. So, so after that, I was single at the time, and someone I worked with, she set me up on a blind date with her roommate at the time. And so this was, I think, almost a week exactly after I was diagnosed. And I didn't, I didn't, I don't think I grasped how dangerous the situation was. So I was just going about my life, pretending that nothing was extremely wrong with me. And so I went on a blind date with her, and she's my wife now. And we hit it off right away. And I remember this distinctly. I had bought I think when I was diagnosed, I went out and bought this Lutheran Book of Prayer, which is just a book that has a bunch of like prayers in it. And there's a prayer for, I should have looked it up before this call, but it was a prayer for, it wasn't for dating, but it was for finding a wife or something. It was something like that. It was about finding your partner. And I remember that every time I would go see her, I would go through that, and I would say that one, and apparently it worked because she stuck with me. And we'll get into that. So after the diagnosis, I went to Mayo like they suggested, and they kept saying how serious it was, and they immediately scheduled me for another surgery to get the rest of the cancer out, because when they took the lump out of my hand, they didn't get everything. I think they call it positive margins, where the cancer was still on the outside of the surgical area. So they had to go in and take a lot more of my hand out, and it interfered with tendons and stuff. So they had to do, like plastic surgery to make sure everything still worked. So that was scheduled. Chemo was scheduled, and so we went down to Mayo. This all happened within the span of maybe a month. So we got down to Mayo, and I was in the pre-op room, just about to go under. This is a fairly difficult surgery. I think I was under anesthesia for like 8 or 9 hours, which is a long time to recover from. And just getting ready to go under, and the doctor comes in. He says, "I think we're going to have to do another surgery as soon as you can." And he said, "We talked to some other doctors, and they think that we should take all your lymph nodes out of your armpit, just so it doesn't spread." And I think they call that a lymphodectomy, and it's common with like breast cancer and stuff like that. So that was probably the most let down I've been in my life. I thought I'd just have this surgery, then do some chemo and be done with it. But no, you're gonna do this bad surgery, and then as soon as your body's able, you're gonna do another one. And they're all in Rochester at Mayo, so it's not like you have your support network really with you. So that was one of the low points, I guess, of the beginning of the cancer journey. And through this whole time, I'm still getting to know my girlfriend at the time, and she's sticking in there with me. I had a cast from the surgery after that, and it had to be changed all the time, like 3 times a day, I think. And she'd be the one to clean it out, so she was kind of like my nurse at the time. So that happened. I had that long surgery. Then I think maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, I had the lymphodectomy, the one that he told me about. And that one was a lot tougher because they take out a big chunk of your armpit, so there's more to recover from. And I had like a bag that drained fluid, and a lot of work to keep it clean and all that. And the whole time, JC, my girlfriend at the time, my wife, she was the one emptying the bag and helping me with dressing my wounds and stuff like that. So that's kind of the whole surgery period. I had a bunch of surgeries within a short amount of time. And I've always been one to go the extra mile. Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but I'm not afraid of a challenge. But when I got diagnosed, I got promoted at my job at the time. I was working at a trucking company. But looking back, I don't know if it was a promotion, because instead of working an 8 to 5, I had to work at 4 in the morning until 1. So this whole time, my sleep schedule was really bad. I wasn't getting a lot of sleep, and I was going into the office really early, because of course I couldn't go to bed at 8 o'clock at night. I was 22 at the time, so had challenges at work. But looking back, I know a lot of people that have had cancer, and the people that like quit work and kind of just chill, they're the ones that have had the roughest time. And the ones that have kind of kept doing their normal thing and kept their routines up are the ones that seem to do the best mentally, maybe physically too. So looking back, I'm really glad I didn't take a leave of absence at the time.
What sort of thoughts were going through your mind throughout this whole process? I mean, you talked about the experience, but what sort of talk tracks were running in your mind?
Well, it was my first time that I've thought, hey, I could die from this, or I could die, right? I mean, when you're young, you feel like you're invulnerable. You feel like nothing can touch you. You're never gonna die. And cancer happens to someone else. It doesn't happen to you. Or cancer happens to people that are 70 years old, right? So it took I had to grow up really fast, I guess, to confront my mortality.
And now this might sound harsh, but your now wife, what made her stick it out with you? What did she tell you? Because from the way you told the story, she only met you 1 week into this diagnosis. She could have just run for the hills. Why did she why did she stick it out?
I think if she was smart, she would have. I don't know. We've talked about this many times, and she has a different answer every time. But she said that, I don't know. I don't want to misquote her, but I guess she really liked me. I guess let's just say that. But I don't know. It seems if I was in that situation, I don't know if I'd do the same thing. So.
So from a faith standpoint, tell me more about your faith during that time.
When I got diagnosed, the first two things I did is I went to Sun Mart in West Fargo, and I bought pomegranate juice, because at the time people were saying that pomegranate juice would protect you from cancer. So I, very simple-minded, said, well, I'll just go buy some pomegranate juice and I'll be fine. So that sticks out in my mind. And I went to Barnes & Noble and bought a Bible. I had a different Bible at home, but I wanted kind of a smaller one that I could bring with me. So I went to Sun Mart, got the pom juice, then drove down 13th and went to Barnes & Noble and bought a new Bible. First two things I did.
I love that. Now you're here to tell the story today. So how did that recovery process go, and what was it like after you were recovered?
Well, I don't think there was recovery for the rest of the year, honestly. So this whole thing started in February, and my last chemo treatment was New Year's Eve of that year, so 2012. The better part of a year. After I went to, after I had the last surgery, the lymphodectomy, I started chemo almost immediately, and it was a weekly chemo I did. And I remember that I had a chemo session, my first chemo session, where, and I don't expect your listeners to know this, but when they do chemo through a port in your chest, they put this really thick needle thing into the port. It's kind of like a USB charger, except they put dangerous chemicals in it. And the nurse at the time, she was new. She put this really, really thick needle. She missed the port and went right into my pec, right into my chest. And I thought that's what it was gonna be like every time. And she said, no, I just missed it and went right into your chest. So I had like a 2.5-inch needle just go right into my chest at the time.
Oh my gosh.
And then right after that, we went to Rochester for a follow-up appointment. So remember that was a tough time. But like I said, I had chemo every single week for 9 months. And if I remember, I had 2 weeks of kind of a lighter chemo session where I didn't get super sick to start. And then the third week was the rough one, where they gave me a lot of chemo. So the first maybe 3 or 4 sessions, maybe the first month, so that'd be June of 2012, I didn't get really sick. Of course, I was told I was going to get sick and I didn't. So I was kind of, flaunting that, like, of course, I'm too tough to get sick from chemo, right? And that, of course, I was humbled pretty quickly after that, because the more, they give you these chemo treatments, the more it accumulates and the more it wears your body down. It's like if you went to the gym and worked out extremely hard every single day, eventually you would break down, right? Your body can't handle that.
Mhm.
So did that, started doing that. I think probably the realest part where it got extremely real was the end of that first month when my hair started falling out. At first it started falling out on my head, and then all over my body, then my eyebrows, which is the weird part because you just look really weird without eyebrows. I look at pictures of myself from
Oh,
back then, like that. I was scaring people looking like that.
oh.
So that's where, before I didn't look sick, like I didn't look like I was sick with cancer, but as soon as the hair started falling out, I couldn't really hide it. So I had to, swallow my pride, my youthful pride that I had, and kind of, get with it.
Mm.
And at that point, I don't want to get graphic, but the treatments got bad. I would, so for the bad treatments, not the mediocre ones, but the really bad ones, I would go in on Friday, get the infusions all day long, and probably vomit 15 times in the next 2 days. Couldn't keep water or anything down, and so that I would go in on Friday, and then by Monday night I could have my first like meal. So that's at the point where I could actually keep it down. So it
Mm.
got really rough. At that point is when I kind of started to dabble in like alternative therapies for the nausea. I didn't really like. Actually, I hated the nausea meds they gave you because the side effects were almost worse than the nausea. They would give me like sleep terrors where I would kind of wake up and be half asleep and like you couldn't move. And I got those from the nausea meds, so I said I didn't want to do those. So I started to started with acupuncture. Then I went to like meditation, all these Eastern things, and then what was the other thing? It's escaping me. Hypnotism was probably the most Eastern of all those. So I did all those things. They actually helped. They helped my nausea. And at the time, everyone was, when your support network around you, they want you to feel better, regardless of what the cost is. And I'd mentioned I was kind of a casual Christian. I didn't see kind of the danger in those Eastern things, but they slowly started to creep up the kind of the side effects, right? If the devil was scary, no one would do stuff that he wants you to do. So he, there's a bit of a carrot on the front of the stick to lure you in, right? And I can talk about that later in kind of the second part about the cancer-free period. But that kind of summed up that 9-month period. And I liked to tell my wife at the time that when she eventually got pregnant, that I was pregnant too for 9 months. I had chemo because a lot of the symptoms and side effects are very similar. Food aversions, there's certain foods you want, there's certain foods you crave, there's certain foods you can't stand. The morning sickness, the nausea, and just a lot of the symptoms are very similar to being pregnant that I've saw in my wife and other people.
Right. And it was 9 months. So
Yeah.
I mean, I want to say that's funny too, but it's not funny, but that you went through that for 9 whole months, but just the irony of that.
I tried to find humor as much as I could in it. I always try to do that, and I really jacked that up when I was doing the treatments. My wife tells me the funniest part of the whole chemo thing is when I was doing an infusion, I had a nurse that was with me all the time. Like we knew each other pretty well by that point. And I had this thing where whenever the nurse would walk in, if you've been to a doctor, the first thing they do is they get the hand sanitizer, right? And there's that sound and they get it in their hand. The minute she would do that, I would start throwing up because I was conditioned to know that as soon as that happens, you're in for some pain. So it's like Pavlov's dog, except it was with vomiting.
Oh no.
So,
oh my gosh.
I was
Wow.
very, very bad about that. And to this day, I really don't like hand sanitizer and a few other
Oh
things.
man, and the pandemic really was miserable.
Yeah, I toughed it out.
Oh, does even like the
So
smell of hand sanitizer trigger you?
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of triggers. I mean, they use a particular like floor cleaner in the Roger Maris Center that I memorized, my brain memorized. And I remember a couple times I went to like West Acres Mall, and I knew they used the exact same floor cleaner because instantly I felt like throwing up when I walked in there. But your sense of smell is one of your strongest memories.
Mhm.
So that still gets me even 11 years
Oh
11
my
years
gosh.
since. Um,
Well, let's talk a little bit more about like post cancer and the things, the experiences you had post cancer.
yeah. So New Year's Eve 2012 was my last chemo treatment. It was exciting. It was exciting for everybody. We got to ring the bell. That's what you do when you're done with the treatment, your treatments at the Roger Maris Center. So we did that. I was, on top of the world. I felt that my whole life's gonna be easy now because what can be tougher? And I think they call that a honeymoon period.
Mm.
After you're married, you have a honeymoon period where your wife or your husband can do no wrong. I felt like that with just everything in my life. And
Mhm.
eventually that wore off a few months, probably 3 or 4 months after that last treatment. And I started to get anxiety, which I had never really experienced in my life. And I didn't really know what to do with it.
Mm.
And I was actually diagnosed with PTSD, I guess, from the cancer experience, which I guess is common. Something that I learned, you know, probably only a few years ago, I realized this, but at the time, the rage was that people that eat a vegetarian diet, they can't get cancer. I had read this somewhere, maybe a few places. So at the time, I wasn't eating meat. I was eating a vegetarian diet, and knowing what I know now, being deficient in B12 and all these other, essential nutrients, they can really spike anxiety and depression and a lot of things, and hurt your digestive system, which also happened to me at the time. So that was also something that I didn't realize at the time. I thought it was helping me because I didn't want to catch cancer again. I didn't want to rebound, but that was, exacerbating my anxiety. So, um, and at this time, the rechecks started with the doctor. So you have a scan every certain number of months to check to see if the cancer came back, and that became a huge source of anxiety for me. I would dread the month that I knew I had a recheck. If I had a recheck in June, as soon as May 31st rolled around, I'd be upset because pretty soon I've got to figure out if I'm gonna die or not. And looking back, a lot of this is looking back because at the time I didn't come to these conclusions, but when you're anxious about a cancer scan, you're afraid God's will and your will aren't the exact same thing, right? So it's
Mm.
like you're wanting your will to be more, take precedent over what God wants for you, which is, it's wrong. And I wish I, realized that at the time, but all I could do is be anxious about it. And with this anxiety, I said, well, let's do what I did for the nausea. Let's just throw some Eastern stuff at it. And I did hypnotism again and meditation. And at that time, I really started to feel spiritually persecuted, for lack of a better term. Um, you know, I've, I don't really want to get into the details because this is different for everybody, but I felt persecuted, and um, I felt evil around me at the time. And knowing what I know now, I realized that I was opening doors by dabbling in these Eastern things. Which, when I say Eastern, I'm talking about things like meditation and hypnotism, which um, although they are extremely popular in our culture today, what they do is for hypnotism, for example, you open yourself up. You want to get everything out of your mind, right? Um, you want to. So essentially, what you're doing is you're opening yourself up to things to come into your mind if you're emptying it. And the difference between like an Eastern meditation and a Christian one is if you're a Christian and you meditate, typically you're meditating on the Word of God, so you're filling it with something good. And if you're doing transcendental meditation, I'm not an expert on these things, but you're emptying your mind and things come in there, right? And this isn't something that you're going to hear in mainstream news. That mainstream news thinks that meditation is, the best thing you can do, right? But there are studies that show that people's mental health actually decreases from meditation. There's always studies proving, on opposite sides of the coin. So knowing what I know now, I knew that that's what was happening. I was opening doors, and I wasn't leaning on God. I was leaning on other things at the time.
Hmm. Well, and I love what you said about meditating on the word of God and how that type of meditation can be really powerful and beautiful because you're actually filling your mind with the Holy Spirit and with God's word. But it is very common these days for those more Eastern practices to, be popular. And so it's really interesting. So for you to get through this anxiety, um, if those things didn't work, I mean, what eventually worked?
Well, I think the answer. It's praying. It's God. I I didn't totally piece together that the Eastern things were causing it, and the vegetarianism. I didn't realize that at all. But eventually, I put it together somewhat, and I said, well, let's just try just entirely, getting more into the Word, going to church more, and making God more of the center of my life. And eventually, slowly, I got back to normal. It took a year and a half at least, where I was living a pretty tough existence. It felt like, and there's, and I mentioned kind of the honeymoon period after cancer. You feel guilty because you feel like you should be good now because you beat cancer. So quit worrying about the little things. I mean, anxiety is literally worrying about things that probably won't happen, right? It's so I was hard on myself because I felt like I shouldn't be like this, right? I'm tougher than this.
I love that. Well, and now, tell us more about you and your wife and kind of your life now and the beauty in your current situation.
Yeah. So after this, there's the cancer that happened, and there was the little big rough stretch with the anxiety and things like that. During the whole time, my wife's with me, helping me, girlfriend at the time, and we eventually went in, and the doctor said that this chemo that you've been on is pretty bad, and it might make you sterile. And I said, well, let's hope not. But eventually I got tested, and they said, yeah, you don't have viable guys, right? You're not going to have kids the normal way, and that was pretty depressing. But luckily I had frozen my genetic material so we could use it for treatments. So I think about 2016 is when we started doing fertility treatments. First, we did kind of the less invasive procedure. I think it's called IUI. Did that a couple times, and it's very expensive as well, and it's really tough on mom because she has to take certain drugs that modify her hormones, progesterone, and things like that, and it's really tough on her body, right? So IUI did not succeed several times. So the next step up when that doesn't work is IVF. That's in vitro fertilization, where they take one of the woman's eggs and fertilize it with one of my frozen sperms. And so we did that and had success. The 2 eggs were fertilized. She was pregnant with twins, and pretty shortly after that, she miscarried them. So we were pretty heartbroken at that point, and the IVF is extremely expensive. So we couldn't immediately just start and do it again because our insurance only allowed one shot at it, so to speak. So we at that time were like, well, I guess we're not having kids. Let's adopt or something. So we were pretty heartbroken for quite a while, and then my wife, she found a clinic in Arizona that actually did IVF treatments in Arizona, and they were quite a bit cheaper. And so we said, well, let's go down there and do it. We just fly down there and get it done, and it's a quarter of the cost of what it'd be up in Fargo. And booked the tickets. This was in May of 2017, roughly, and I think it was maybe a week or two before we were going to go, and she took a pregnancy test just to make sure she wasn't going to waste her time. And of course, she was pregnant. So huge curveball. Like I mentioned earlier, the doctor said that there's little to no chance that she would ever get pregnant naturally. So that was a miracle baby, essentially. And the whole, I mean, my reaction, I was very excited and surprised, but the best part was when we went to, I think it was Easter that year. Okay, it must have been April then. We went to Easter, or maybe it was Memorial Weekend. Anyways, we went to an event where all my family was there, and we had, I don't know if we had like a T-shirts that said something about dad. We had one of those, cheesy gender reveal type things, and so the whole family went wild when we told them we were pregnant. And it's one of the unspoken things about cancer and any trauma really is that the person who it happens to, so myself, often the mental toll that it takes on the victim, that's a bad word, the patient, is not as bad as the people around it. So the people around me had it tougher, is what I'm saying, for a lot of reasons. I mean, I feel like I may have a little bit of control over myself, but if you're a mom watching your 20-year-old son get wrecked by chemo, there's not much you can do, and you wish it was you, and all those kind of internal monologues. But to give the gift back to them of a grandkid to my grandparents, and to my parents, then a great grandkid to my grandparents, that was really great. And it was we had the miracle baby in 2018. Henrik, he's our firstborn, and yeah, that was the first miracle, I guess.
And now, how many kids do you have?
Well, there's 3 now. They're all miracles. So after Henrik was born, we actually had a little bit of a stretch where we were thinking about doing IVF again, because there was no second one on the way. And lo and behold, one day JC told me she was pregnant again, and 9 months later we had another baby. So that was the second one, Clara. She was born in 2020. And at this point, we were thinking, I've heard that a lot of people plan how many kids they're going to have. I don't think we ever had that conversation. We were just kind of taking what God gave us, because I feel like at that point you kind of have to, take what you can get.
Take what you can get.
So when Claire was very young, she told me again that she was pregnant, and Noah was born, I'm going to butcher this, 14 months after Clara, very close together. So she had, we had our last child very, very close to the middle one. And all 3 of them are doing great. They're 5, 2, and 1 right now. And yeah, it's something that I did not expect to happen. For one, when I was going through the cancer treatment, and 2, when we were kind of in the depths of despair in the IVF, IUI time of our life.
So, I mean, this is incredible hearing about, you have now 3 miracle babies, and you've come out of the other side. You've maybe learned a little bit more how to deal with your anxiety. You're happy, you're healthy. How has this given you more hope, or how do you carry these experiences forward? Like, what hope can we share with our listeners here today coming out of this story?
Well, I think the most important lesson that I learned, it's kind of a thread that goes through all of these different things that have happened in my life the last 11 years. But the real enemy has been fear. And I feel like that through all these experiences, I've been able to, I don't want to boast, but I feel like I have a pretty good handle on how to handle, I have a pretty good grasp on how to handle fear. And I know the dangers it can have, what if you're in a fearful state, what decisions it can make you have. When I was, when I was nauseous and I was fearful for my life, fear led me to go seek out these Eastern things and to put less faith in God and more into other things. When I had anxiety, I mean, anxiety is closely related to fear. I was afraid that my will was not God's, or God's will was not mine. I didn't want to get cancer again. I didn't want to have a relapse. So whenever a scan came up, I would be extremely fearful, all for nothing, for no reason. It's been said that the phrase, depending on your translation, the phrase "fear not" appears in the Bible at least 300 times. So it, taking that, it's important. And I look around, and since 2020 specifically, fear has really taken center stage in people's psyches across the world, right? We're afraid of this, so we do this. We're afraid of that this might happen, so we make this decision that we normally would never make, right? We make compromises based on fear. And I feel like during this kind of whole rise in fearfulness, I mean, I feel like the world is not getting better, which the Bible tells us is going to happen. It's not getting better in the last 3 years, and fear is only taking more of a center stage than in the past. But when this started happening, knowing, having went through my kind of battle with fear and through cancer and all these things, I knew that when I saw people making these fear-based decisions, I knew that it was the wrong thing and that they would regret it. But unfortunately, it's a lot of people make decisions that they can't undo. So I don't know. I feel like one of my main teaching points to my kids is to not be afraid of anything, right? People that have God and they put their trust in God, they shouldn't have anything to fear. Anxiety. There's many poetic verses in Luke and in Mark that talk about, not being afraid, and don't be anxious for today because tomorrow has enough. Tomorrow will worry about itself. And that's really been one of the biggest kind of hinge points of the last part of my life is sharing my thoughts on fear and how to overcome it, things like that.
I love that. I think that fear gets in the way of a lot of us, even talking about our Christian faith, right? That can be scary too. And fear, to your point, just does have such a tight grip on our society. I think it holds us back from maybe speaking about God's truth and sharing the word of God with others, even from that standpoint. And I think listening to your story, it's so obvious all of the moments when God was there for you and really was blessing. I mean, even your wife coming into your life a week after your diagnosis, that gives me goosebumps. And then just thinking about your children that you've been able to have. And, Brad, I feel like you have had so many experiences that could relate to someone else who is going through cancer right now, and just knowing that it is possible, like, have no fear, you will come out on top. But also, to your point, recognizing that it's not your will, it's God's will. And that, I can't even imagine being in that moment of knowing that you have cancer, needing to go through treatment. I can't imagine feeling that way. I think I would be extremely scared and angry. But for you to be able to speak that message of be courageous, have no fear, that's what the Bible says and tells us. I just think that's so wonderful.
And don't get me wrong, I was definitely scared and angry. I definitely didn't let people know that, though. It was I kept it, hidden in that place where men put their emotions that they never show.
Yep.
But I always try to show the strong demeanor, but I think the one thing I've done ever since I've been a cancer survivor is I've mentored people that are either going through treatments or they're just diagnosed or something like that, because especially for young people, it's one thing if you're someone who's in their 50s or 60s, where you can talk to someone that's one of your peers that's probably had cancer, right? It's a lot more common the older you get. But when you're very young, there's not a lot of commonality. So what I've done is I've taken a lot of people under my wing that have been diagnosed, and showed them, told them what to expect. Essentially just was there to give them someone to talk to that they can relate to, because having your doctors talk to you is one thing, and having people that are older than you is another. But I think you can relate more so to your peers. So that's something that I've consistently done the last 11 years, is reach out to people, even if they don't want to be reached out to. And I've volunteered through a few organizations that kind of facilitate that organization, that mentorship. So I feel like that's my way of giving back for being a survivor. And it kind of helps alleviate some of that survivor's guilt that survivors can have, because inevitably, if you associate with other people that have had cancer, people are gonna die. And when you are the one that survives, there's guilt there, no matter what. So that's been huge for me.
I can't imagine. I can see that being really hard to know that not everyone does make it through. But I guess, as we look towards closing, Brad, is there anything else that you were hoping to share in our conversation today about your story, or about overcoming fear, or any other tips for our listeners?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd like to I think you're going to have my info in the show notes, but if you know anybody that wants to talk, about their experience with cancer, and especially if they can be, I don't care how old they are, but I know a lot of people like to talk to, a lot of young people like to talk to young people. But if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'll welcome anybody and everybody. But I encourage people to look at their life and the decisions they're making, and especially if they're tough decisions, ask yourself, am I making this decision out of fear, or am I making it out of, a prayerful, decision based on, what is this fear-based or not, I guess is a decision point. And you'll find yourself making a lot of decisions out of fear to, avoid this pain X, Y, Z. So I think that's a huge inflection point in your life, is when you step back and think about, why am I doing this, right? Am I doing this for this reason or that reason?
I feel like I've heard that before, but that just hit me in the face. I think about all the decisions we make throughout our day and our week, and even whether or not you go do XYZ thing. Are you saying yes because you're afraid of what people will think if you say no? Or am I taking on this additional project because I feel like if I don't do it, or if I don't take the lead, it's going to fall flat on its face? Like, there are so many areas in our life too where I feel like we say yes to too many things because we're afraid of what happens if we don't say yes. And so in my mind, that's where I went. But I do think that prayerfully making each decision throughout your day, based on where you feel God is calling you, versus making fear-based decisions, I think that's really valuable. So thank you for that idea, Brad.
Ultimately, when your life and your decisions and your persona and your character is based on wisdom, is based on the Bible, the world doesn't have as much of an effect on you. And by the world, I mean everything worldly: cancer, pain, death.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being willing to share your story. This has been so inspiring and wonderful to connect with you today, Brad. I just so appreciate you coming on our podcast. I know that our listeners are feeling inspired by your message. And so thank you for being a part of this.
It's been a pleasure. I've had a good time. You're fun to talk to.
Thanks.